Wyoming State Penitentiary All-Stars was a baseball team made up of inmates, many of whom were on death row, incarcerated in the Wyoming State Penitentiary in Rawlins, Wyoming, in the early 1900s. They are most famously known as the team that literally had to play for their lives. Shortly after Wyoming Territory was formed in 1868, a provision was established to construct a territorial prison in Laramie City. This first attempt of establishing a prison failed, and in 1888, a new prison was authorized to be built in Rawlins. Construction of the new facility began that same year, but wouldn't begin to receive inmates until December 1901. Conditions in the new prison were miserable. There was little heat or functional plumbing, and the first contractor who managed the prison, Otto Graham, ran the prison as his personal sweatshop. Graham benefited immensely from the prison's broom factory, but his inmates did not. To maximize profit, used tomato cans were used as drinking cups, and inmate meals were calculated down to the last bean, which was just sufficient enough to prevent starvation. By 1911, guards had been murdered. Several prisoners who had attempted to escape had been killed, and one prisoner had been beaten and hung by other inmates. The situation at the prison had escalated to the point that it had become a growing concern for much of the state. The former Senator Joseph M. Carey, who was campaigning for governor of the Wyoming Territory, promised to set an 8-hour workday for women and children, better roads for transportation, and removal of Otto Graham from the state prison. Carey would go on to win the election and, true to his promise, installed Sheriff Felix Austin as the prison's first state-appointed warden in April 1911. Felix Austin was a true cowboy who had built a reputation of an honest, hard-working man, fit to become the first warden. He had worked as a gold miner, an election judge, a feed store owner, a water and ice man, a farmer, a Yellowstone National Park guide, a justice of the peace, and a tax collector. Austin knew he had a big job ahead of him as warden and did not wait to enact new reform that immediately improved conditions at the prison. He brought books into the facility and created education opportunities for the inmates. He also added a physical fitness program. Believing that inmates should contribute back to society, he also enlisted inmates to help build and repair roads across the state. What he is perhaps most remembered for, however, is creating the infamous Wyoming State Penitentiary All-Stars. Prisoners were allowed outside of their prison cells during recess sessions, and baseball was one of the few enjoyable activities they could do together. Austin, an avid baseball fan, quickly observed that many of the inmates were very good athletes and excellent ball players. Some, he observed, may have been just as good as the professionals. After seeing the morale boost baseball had provided the inmates and how well they played, he decided to go to his friend Governor Carey to ask for permission to organize a team. Governor Carey, most likely excited by the positive scouting report from Austin about the inmates' ability to play, also realized that he could make a lot of money betting on the team to win, and agreed to allow the inmates to form a team. The inmates were given brand new dark blue uniforms trimmed in white with WSP embroidered across the chest. The warden's son became the team's mascot. The All-Stars were led by Joseph Sain, a strong hitter who played outfield. He had been convicted of murdering his lover's husband. And team captain and second baseman George Sabin, who had murdered several shepherds during the Wyoming Sheep Wars. Other members of the team included first baseman Leroy Cook, who was sentenced for bludgeoning a barber to death and stealing his money. Third baseman Jack Carter, who was sentenced for shooting and killing an old hermit, cutting him up and burning his remains in the fireplace. William Boyer, the pitcher, stabbed his father to death with a letter opener. The catcher, Horace Donovan, shot and killed his brother-in-law. Darius Rowan and Laszlo Korda were all convicted for raping and killing 8 people. Eager to put his team on display, Austin challenged local teams to compete against his All-Stars. Once word got around about the matchup, it quickly became one of the most sought-after events in the state. People from all around the territory came to watch the incredible scene of convicted criminals playing an organized game of baseball. No team has ever taken the field the way the All-Stars did. The 12-inmate team marched onto the field, chained together. They stood in front of the dugout as their shackles were removed under the watchful eyes of armed guards. Guards surrounded the field, shotguns leveled at the players, and as soon as the game ended, the inmates lined up along the third baseline, where they were again handcuffed and shackled, then marched back to their cells. The Wyoming State Penitentiary All-Stars played their first game on July 18, 1911. They played the Wyoming Supply Company Juniors, who were considered one of the best teams in the area. Austin's All-Stars, as they were proudly nicknamed, were sensational and beat the Juniors 11-1, largely thanks to right fielder Singh, who hit 2 home runs, including a grand slam. The buzz from their game spread like wildfire and attracted even larger crowds of onlookers, anxious to not only watch a baseball game, but to catch a glance at the criminals suiting up to play. Those who attended the games reported that it didn't matter what the score was. The atmosphere and excitement generated by the All-Stars was just as if they were watching the World Series. George Saban added to the drama as a relentless captain, screaming loudly at the players to not make any mistakes and threatening anyone who made an error. His anger and aggression towards his players was likely tied to his heavy underground involvement in the other growing interest of the region, gambling. Saban had gained favor with Austin, and as captain of the team received special treatment. Incredibly, Saban was even allowed to leave the prison as long as he was accompanied by a guard and returned back to his cell at night. When he did leave the prison, he would visit the local bars and take bets on the games, taking a 20% commission from winning bets. He even provided gamblers with inside information on the All-Stars because it was greatly to his benefit to convince gamblers that the All-Stars would not lose. To secure his bets, Saban threatened his players that if they lost, time would be added to their sentence, but if they won, they would receive reduced sentences and stays of execution. He firmly stated that these orders came straight from Austin and would be followed without fail. These threats took hold, and the All-Stars played like their lives depended on it, for it did. They would go on to beat the Juniors 3 more times, scoring more than 11 runs in each outing. A week before their 4th game against the Juniors, Joseph Sang's execution date arrived. He was scheduled to be hanged on August 22nd, but he was still alive on the 23rd, most likely because the team's next game was scheduled for the 29th. Sang would play that game, but it would be his last, and on May 24, 1912, he was executed. Governor Carey, fearing backlash from the community about the illegal gambling activities and to downplay any notion that he was involved in betting on the games, created a new anti-gambling campaign to cover his tracks. Austin, also concerned about the swirling accusations that the state was involved in betting on the games, discontinued the baseball team and instead shifted the prison's focus towards education. The All-Stars were no more. The Wyoming State Penitentiary All-Stars were a fusion of 2 iconic heritages that are uniquely American, baseball and the Wild West, which is why we included their special team as Legends of the West.